All right, good evening, everyone. This is our first meeting of the night of the Shoreham Town Council, Wednesday, May 20th, 5 o'clock. The New Shoreham Town Council will meet via telecommunications pursuant to a State of Rhode Island Executive Order 2025, dated April 15th, 2020. Only those participants who have been entered in will be allowed to speak at this meeting. Those present include myself, Second Warden Andre Boudreau, council members Martha Ball, Sven Riesum, Christopher Willie, Finance Director, Interim Town Manager Jim Kern, Finance Director Amy Lewis, and Town Solicitor Catherine Marola. Thank you all for joining us. The first item on the agenda for tonight is to discuss the extension of authority granted to the Treasurer and the Town Council under the May 6, 2019 warrant to ensure continuity of critical treasury critical treasury management and financing functions. To remind everybody to turn their cell phone ringers off, and if you are making any kind of noise, hit the mute button on your computers. Jim, did you want to start the conversation off, Jim Kern?
I will. I'll introduce Finance Director Amy Land. Not that she needs any introduction. Had a little musical interlude there. I wanted to kind of preview the three things that Amy's going to primarily talk about tonight, and try to describe the actions that are coming in the future. So, as is reflected in the agenda, these are all discussions. They're not votes. We will be looking for a vote, particularly on number one, not the next meeting tonight, obviously, but the next scheduled meeting. I think number three may require a little bit more, but I'll get to that in a minute. Number one, although the activities are significant, the action being asked of the council is rather simple. And I wanted to say that because it's easy, speaking from my own experience, to make this more complicated than it needs to be, in terms of when I first read it from Amy. This is a case, Amy has participated in all kinds of calls, involving finance directors and the finance people at the state. It has also come into a number of calls that I've participated in with town managers and mayors. There's been a lot of conversation about those communities with financial town meeting. I think I've represented in previous meetings that most of the approaches that we've suggested have not been acceptable to the Department of Health, although that's an ongoing conversation. I wanted to give a little bit of background for the people in town and also for the council that obviously when we first closed down, we were given permission to postpone or cancel financial town meeting. We've been trying to find a way to put it back together. We may eventually get that way as a state or as a community, but this first item on the agenda tonight is required because the items in it would normally be done at financial town meeting, and they have to do with the authority of the treasurer and the town council to function in the treasurer role, tax anticipation notes, otherwise known as TANs, revenue anticipation notes, refunding bonds, that kind of thing. So it's a pretty mechanical thing. And this is an extraordinary set of circumstances where the town council would be granting the authority to the treasurer and the town council to do that in the stead of or in the place of financial town meeting. Talking to town attorney Kathy Marola and Amy, we thought the best approach was to create a separate emergency ordinance from the one that involves all of the other things that we've done. And I'll let Amy take it from here and talk through how that would work.
Sure, thanks. As Jim said, it's actually pretty straightforward. Everything in the emergency ordinance is language that you've seen before at financial town meeting in the warrant, and we're looking to extend that authority under the emergency ordinance until such time as a financial town meeting can be convened again. And as Jim started to mention, it's a very limited scope of activities, but we do need to continue access to them, particularly in these times. And that's the ability to issue, if necessary, tax anticipation notes, revenue anticipation notes for sewer and for water charges, to refund bonds, which actually we may have an opportunity to do in the next few months, to place investments and to open and close bank accounts, which is really mechanical. Those always have to be consistent with the town's investment policy as well. And then for the town to expend grant funds, which are generally not budgeted for, but if they are awarded, we want to be able to continue to take advantage of those opportunities. But I'm happy to take questions if anyone has concerns.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Jim. Does anyone have any concerns or questions for Amy? Sven Riesem?
Amy, thank you very much, and thanks for keeping everything going over the last few months. I know it's not been normal, right? If we, for some reason, is there an expiration on this window? Meaning if we don't have a financial town meeting and we just roll the next year, is that okay? Or is there a 6 month, like how does that work?
And Kathy can jump in if she needs to, but there's the way that it's written, it will be in existence until a financial town meeting is convened. At that point, whenever that may be, at that point, the voters can decide whether to continue the authority or if they want to remove that authority from the town, they can do so. But at the next viable opportunity, that question comes back to them.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Other questions for Amy? Martha, do you have anything?
I don't right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I do actually.
Okay.
And how far out do we have this authority right now? Do you have the authority? How long do you have? How long do we have before we have to give you more authority?
One could argue that it doesn't necessarily expire
Definitely.
until you have a meeting, but taking this action will remove any question from the table, particularly if we need to go to market for a borrowing, an anticipation note, or a refunding. We don't want any questions. So this is a double check on that.
Thank you very much.
Chris, I notice your mic is muted. I don't know if you did it on purpose or not. Do you have anything? Any questions?
No, I have no questions. Thank
Okay.
you.
You ended up dropping down to the bottom of my list on the side too. I didn't want to miss your hand waving. So, Andre, anything?
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I'm good too. Thank you, Amy. As we said, we'll, I guess this isn't an action item tonight, but we'll put it on an agenda in the very near future as necessary, right? Yes. Okay. All right. Next item on the agenda is to cover the financials through April 30th, 2020. Jim, do you want to start, or you want Amy to start?
Yeah, no more introductions from me. I'm done. I'll let him.
Okay. Amy, did you want to start?
Sure. I first want to apologize. Some of you have a version that is missing some column headers. So if you look at that first group of columns, those are your current year numbers. The second group of columns, year-to-date budget and variance, that's your prior year numbers. And then the last group is your current year projections, if anyone is missing some of their headers. But what you have in front of you are the financials through April 30th. Obviously, we had a pretty significant slowdown in revenues for March and April. And then over to the right, you have your current year projections to 6/30. Obviously, these are moving on a daily basis. What you see here is a pretty conservative approach, although not a worst case scenario. It takes a responsible view of revenues. And you'll see that it comes close, 99% of our budgeted expenditures, but it does not actually exceed the budget appropriation. It's what we're projecting at this point. Looking at that first summary page, you can see year to date excess revenues over expenditures. We have a $500,000 deficit at this point. That's not normally where we are at this point in the year. And that's all because of the last 6 weeks. If you look all the way to the right, that projection right now, we're looking at again, a conservative deficit of just over $800,000. All of that is significantly loss of revenue driven. As I said, we're right on the mark in terms of budgeted expenditures, but the fall off in revenue has been significant. In terms of what that means for the town in the big picture, we went into this year with a very healthy reserve position. We had unrestricted reserves of $2.5 million, which is about 17% of our annual operating budget. With the projected deficit that we're looking at right now, we'll still be in a range that we can absorb. We'd be looking at about $1.7 million of unrestricted reserves, which is about 11% of budget. A lot of communities target 12% for their ratios. So that gives us more flexibility than a lot of communities, but still is very tight as we start to look into how fiscal year 21 is going to develop. A couple highlights, and then we can go to questions. Tax collections for April, we're actually right on the mark. The first 2 weeks or the first half of May were a little bit slow. And so we're watching sort of day to day how the May collections shape up. I expect they'll be pretty close to normal, a little bit low. It's really that August collection that we're looking at more carefully. Obviously, there's been a halt to building permit revenue, which was tracking a little bit behind last year anyway. And then the other big significant hit is the hotel meals and the cottage tax. And we're basically budgeting zero for the rest of the year on those. But I'm happy to take specific questions if people have them, or big picture conversations if that's where you want to go.
Anyone have any questions? Okay, let's move on. Oh, Jim?
I think
Sorry. I thought Sven was going to go. I was trying to yield.
Oh, I see it on Sven. Sven, go ahead. Sven, you're muted.
Sven, you're muted.
There you go. Sorry about that. Tracking line 4070 building permits. It looks like we're expecting it to go up considerably, to end up. I mean, is there something that's going on? I know it looks like it's going to end up at about 75% projected percent used. But it looks like 180 versus 120. Can you help me with how that works?
Are you still on the first?
Sure.
No, I'm on page
We're
line.
on page,
Sorry.
we're on page 3, about halfway down the page, line 4070 building permits. And we're actually going to walk from left to right, if you don't mind. So year to date through April, $106,159 brings us to 71% of budgeted revenues so far on a budget of $150,000. The numbers last year through the end of April, we were at 180,000. So significant difference last year to this year, 180 down to 106. Based on what we've collected for May and a little bit of a bump for June, we think that we're going to wind up around 113,159. That's our projection for 6/30. Again, most of that's based on what we've already collected for May. Is that?
That's been such a big topic for you and Mark. So thanks for all the work to get there. 113 out of 120 would be good.
Chris Willie?
Thanks. Amy, when would you foresee us discussing or moving into discussions on next year or next fiscal year? Obviously, there's a lot of questions, and as far as projections, when are you going to be comfortable making some projections specific to revenues?
Sure. As part of number 3, we're going to discuss how to proceed. And that will involve hopefully laying out a schedule, if the council's interested in doing that, laying out a schedule for discussion of the 21 budget and what it might look like now versus what you received back in March.
Thank you.
Jim Kern?
So the question Sven asked on the building permits is a good segue into this general comment I wanted to make, which is a rather large one. The building permits, that's an example of some competent adjusting for the purposes of estimating local receipts. A bigger year last year, a smaller year this year, even with all of what's transpired, you're not way out of range. That's an example of what finance directors and the town managers and really department heads put together so that those processes work as well as they can. But my comment is really to give the community and the financial leadership in the community credit for the circumstances you find yourself in. I've mentioned that I participate in calls with other communities in Rhode Island, and I've also managed through other downturns in the economy, none quite as dramatic potentially as this, but some dramatic ones. And one of the reasons you budget and operate in a way that such that you have undesignated fund balance, such that New Shoreham has, whether it's in a stabilization fund or just a fund balance. The reason you do that, and I think most people, I think everybody on the council and some people listening probably know that New Shoreham has endeavored to do that to a greater extent. Amy made reference to 17% presently, 11% after what she is predicting to occur. Those are both, 11 is high. I'm not judging that it's too high, but it's higher than a lot of communities would have normally. And so this community, with Amy's leadership, but it takes more than leadership. It takes other people willingness to listen and go along with it. To find yourself in this position is commendable, and it's the reason why you do it that way. It's hard sometimes to convince people to do things like this, to be prudent, but our colleagues in other communities in Rhode Island and in New England and across the country are going to be dealing with very different sets of circumstances. That doesn't mean we're on easy street, but it's a different street than some communities who are already furloughing employees, which is where Chris Willie, we may eventually get to that discussion, not tonight, but sometime. But you want to do this first and then take kind of an assessment of where you are before you start planning the next year. And if you're falling backwards down the stairs when this is happening, the other stuff obviously becomes that much more difficult. So that's the comment. You all should be commended for being in the position you're in. We've got a long way to go, but at least we're not starting out 15 points behind in the fourth quarter.
Thank you, Jim, for the observation. Point well taken. Amy, are there any other important areas you want to touch base on before we leave the financials, or any other questions the council may have? Amy, do you have anything else you want to touch base on?
No, the only other, yes, there is one more point I want people to be aware of. Again, it's not so much an issue for us today, but depending on how the next few months evolve, it may be. The town's cash position remains very strong right now. Again, if collections through May and through the beginning of the season start to increase, it won't be an issue. But there could be a point where, again, we need to call on that authority to bridge cash flow gaps through the summer. In a worst case scenario, issue tax anticipation notes or other notes like that. But at this point, the town's cash position is sufficient to carry us through.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the council on those right now? Hearing none, let's move on to the final item on the agenda, which is discussion of alternate approaches to financial town meeting and fiscal year 2021 budget. I believe we have a handout from Amy on this topic. Amy, do you want to move on to that?
Sure. Jim, did you want to introduce anything, or should I just go ahead?
I'll just jump in quickly. I was formulating what I was going to say and kind of debating whether to intercede. But this is a little bit more complicated, what Amy's going to work through, and a good deal more complicated than the first thing, which is mechanical. That we are actually talking about making some, I'll call them value judgments as to how you, as the leadership in this community, think this community would be comfortable proceeding. And the two things you're balancing are
Jim, could you move a little closer to the mic? Thank you.
things you're balancing are the desire to allow as great a participation, which is what financial town meeting does, as great a participation or as great an effective participation. You can go to referendum, but effective participation, by that I mean the interactive participation that financial town meeting provides. This is a financial town meeting town. You are that for a particular reason. I'm not advocating for any position, but you have to balance that, the expectation and the history in this town with kind of the functional realities if we're not able to run a financial town meeting the way we would like. Amy's going to go through some of the conversations that they've had statewide. I will tell you there's some frustration on the part of the town managers with respect to not being able to use large high school auditoriums and that kind of thing. But up until now, the Department of Health has not been willing to say that any of those kinds of groupings would pass their requirements so that they would be okay with it. So this is a discussion and not a vote again, but it's something that we're going to be asking you as a leadership to consider ultimately which way we go in terms of putting together next year's budget.
Thank you, Jim. Go ahead, Amy.
Sure. So as Jim said, we've had to postpone the financial town meeting from May 4th. And it's clear that we will not be permitted to have an adequate gathering size before June 30th, which means it's time to understand what the possible options are for having a budget and a tax levy in place so that the town can move into fiscal year 21 on solid footing, with some knowns, some authority to spend, some revenue coming in, and just the confidence that we can meet our obligations and fulfill the operations that we're supposed to be delivering. We've been working with the solicitor, with Kathy, with the Rhode Island League of Cities and Towns, with other communities that hold financial town meetings to understand the challenges, as Jim said, come up with creative solutions that may or may not be effective, but at least doing a lot of brainstorming. And at this point, an optimal approach hasn't presented itself. And so it's sort of time to acknowledge the realities and see what we have. And what I'm really recommending come out of this discussion is hopefully pursuing two parallel paths. And that might feel a little bit awkward, but given the timing and given that some of these approaches require action of the legislature, I think it's going to provide the most flexibility and a guaranteed outcome as we move to June 30th. If you look at page 2 of the memo that I sent you, the first option, if you will, on the table, or the first approach, is actually pretty straightforward. Under Rhode Island General Law 45232, if a community does not appropriate a new budget, the existing budget will carry forward. And so that's already in place under Rhode Island law. It's pretty straightforward. It doesn't necessarily provide all that a new budget would. You don't have the opportunity to implement new priorities. You don't have the opportunity to accommodate some of the things you might want to change going into the year, but at least it does have the two requirements, which is spending authority and taxing authority, so that we can continue to function as a town. That's one of the paths that we'll keep in place. If nothing else, we have that ability to continue functioning with the existing 2020 budget, carrying that forward to 2021. There are some options as to whether that carries forward for an entire fiscal year or whether that carries forward until a financial town meeting could be held. And those kind of nuances will keep off in the distance for now and keep it in the big picture. But obviously, as we move forward, those details will have to be discussed.
Why does
So
the-
again, that one's pretty,
Amy, why does the legislature have to reinforce the validity of the approach?
so we assert right now that we have this authority to continue the spending plan, and that with that authority comes the ability to tax. There are some people who are a little uncertain about that, and so they've asked the legislature to reinforce that authority in more explicit words. Whether that's necessary or not, it's hard to say. Again, it can't hurt for them to be more explicit, but we think there's enough in the language now for us to do what we need to do.
Some people being town finance directors, town managers, or legislators?
The fourth category,
All right.
town attorneys.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Amy? Oh,
Martha,
Karen,
go ahead.
Martha?
Go ahead, Martha.
Is this the, I can't remember the term for this. Is this a maintenance of effort or something like that? What was that? There was a term where you,
Sounds like an expanded fifth quarter.
Maintenance of effort has to do with funds for school, and it's the rule that provides
I
you can't
thought
decrease
that,
it.
I thought in an emergency you could go forward with the 12th, the 12th, the 12th.
The language of that law actually does allow you to either do a monthly allotment, or it actually even provides more flexibility and lets you identify a seasonality that is normal for your community. So it doesn't actually have to be a 12th. It could be, you know, our expenses are actually 20% in the first 2 months of the year. We can make that adjustment based on our known seasonality.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions before we move on? Go ahead, Amy.
Sure. The next approach that I would recommend the town be prepared to move forward with is to discuss our 21 budget. The council was presented with a budget in March. We know that it will be different, but to move forward down that path of discussing the priorities, discussing the commitments that we'd like to make, engaging the public in those back and forth. Obviously, it will take us a little work to do the public hearing part and the public engagement part. But it's important and we should move forward with it. What some communities are pursuing, again, through a legislative action, would be the authority for a town council to adopt a 21 budget that is different from your 2020 budget, that reflects new priorities until a financial town meeting can be held or for the next fiscal year. Again, it's something that hasn't really been done. The authority does not exist, and it does require that legislative approval. Communities are pushing it. So far, they've had, they say, good reception from the legislators in this emergency action. It wouldn't be an indefinite authority, it would sunset with executive orders and gathering, releases on gathering sizes, things like that. But as a one-time bridge to get communities into that next fiscal year in a way that everyone can rely on with a reliable budget.
I know this
The
is,
timing on this,
I'm sorry, I know that this is the one that the governor's office has had some reservations about. Are they loosening up on that based on the idea that it's not a full year, that it's just a conditioner?
no, the governor's office has been unwilling to engage in this, in moving this forward. They believe it's more of a legislative avenue in governance of cities and towns. They believe it's not appropriate for an executive order. Connecticut handled it that way through the governor's order. Rhode Island wasn't successful pursuing that approach, and so they've turned to a legislative solution. It's certainly taking that approach of adopting a new 21 budget allows the town to move forward in a different way than if you were just doing a carry forward. There's some appeal to that. For other people, there's reluctance to have the council take on that responsibility in that way. Some communities are interested, some are not.
Sven Reesum? You're muted. You're muted, Sven.
If we wanted to go down that road, if we want to go down that road, is there any requirements that you know of that we need from the public to be able to do that? Or is that a town council decision? Amy.
Sure. As they are drafting it, it would be a council action. One of the reasons we're laying out this today and starting the conversation is without any decision making is that so that we can hear back from the public, whether this is something that's tenable for them.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Amy.
Sure. So again, I am recommending the town pursue those two paths simultaneously, but I do want you to at least be aware of some of these other solutions that are out there. They feel a lot less viable right now, but as I said, people are continuing to brainstorm. And so there's always a chance that something does come together and is blessed by the Department of Health and could actually work for our community. And so some of the ideas that are out there are as Jim mentioned, mail-in ballots. Those tend to be a very yes, no on $15 million. And I don't want to say perfunctory, but I'm blanking on another word. It is a direct authorization by the voters, and that again has some appeal. It's a little more like what we're used to. There's no opportunity for amendments, and it's not currently supported by the charter as a form, which asks that we assemble in a meeting. So again, it would require some flexibility from the legislature, which is all wrapped into what communities are asking for. They're sort of asking for a whole toolbox of tools. The other part is that mail ballot process can require a fair amount of administration on behalf of the clerks and the canvassers. And we may be running out of time to do that before June 30th. Virtual meetings is another topic that got a lot of discussion. At the end of the day, we don't think we're there yet in being able to administer and execute a virtual meeting with public engagement, with registered voters, that provides the full access that voters need to a meeting like this. Do you have the technology? Can you operate the technology? Those types of things get into whether you're potentially disenfranchising voters. It's an interesting long-term solution, whether you can even come up with a hybrid model. And I think communities will pursue that in the long term, an in-person and electronic. But again, I think it might be premature for what we need to execute going into July 1. The drive-in style, I don't know if anyone had a chance to read that. It's actually probably the closest to a real financial town meeting. It hasn't been blessed yet, but that envisions everyone in their cars at a place like the Town Beach parking lot with a dedicated FM channel, canvassers going car to car, votes done either by hands out the window, things like that. And there's an opportunity for public comment if you have strolling microphones. Again, sort of the creative solutions that are interesting, are they actually viable, and are they going to get us where we need to go in the time frame that we need to get there? But I did want you to at least hear some of them. Perhaps some of you have heard others that you want to talk about, but I'm not forwarding any of those for direct consideration at this point.
Questions on this from anyone?
Okay, May.
Andre?
Yes, thank you. And Amy, thank you for another, budget season. Here we are again. And I know this is very difficult. And thank you for giving us these options. But so as I look at these options, are you basically saying option 1 and option 2 you said should be looked at concurrently, and that option 3 and the other ones should just be thought of for future reference? Is there something, is one or two of these something we should be focusing on right now for the immediate problem of a financial town meeting? And then there's others in the back, like maybe in the future? Because I understand, you're on the broadband committee, and, there's thought that we could do this on a Zoom or some kind of other platform. I mean, how many people show up to a financial town meeting? Usually 100 at least, or 80 or something. I'm not sure that's going to be viable, but I don't know. I always think our financial town meetings are unique and for the public participation, and I would, whatever we can do, that would include the public as much as we possibly can this time. I'm going to leave that ball in your court and Jim's court also. But yeah, so are you saying 1 and 2 are pretty much the 2 viable options this year to focus on and not get bogged down in details?
I think that's where the council needs to be focusing.
Okay.
I'm not letting the ideas in number 3 go yet. There are actually 2 working groups of finance directors and solicitors and managers working on those how to hold a financial town meeting ideas. That includes talking directly to some of the technology companies that think they can do these electronic platforms in a way that's more representative of how a financial meeting is held, dealing with things like anonymous votes or paper ballots or some of those nuances. That's more than just a meeting. It's actually a little more structured. So those conversations are ongoing, but in order to keep the business of the town moving forward, I think the council needs to be focused on 1 and 2 right now. I think those are our most viable paths to continuity. If something comes up that I think should be considered, I'll certainly bring that to you.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for your analysis on all this, and Jim also. I was on the legislative meeting this morning with the towns, and this did come up, and the answer, because many towns are asking about this, as and the answer was basically that they're actively exploring options to give to the towns, and there may be something out, new news on that tomorrow. But it seems as though from these meetings that the governor and the leadership are really letting the towns be creative with things like this. There doesn't seem to be many answers. It seems to be, come to us and, figure it out, because every town's different. But I do think that, yeah. Can I ask you something while it's on my mind? These federal, real quick, and it's not on topic, but it may be a little bit, these federal dollars that are going to flow from the state to the towns. being on the broadband committee and broadband being so important for our town meetings and the school children, do you think this would be the build out of the broadband? Do you think we could move forward with that and maybe get federal dollars now because of the emergency? Is that-
Sure, and we should probably have a real meeting about that at some point soon. I know the broadband committee is anxious to keep moving forward. So I'll just give you a 2-minute version, which is yes, there do seem to be a lot more opportunities as connectivity is a priority for everyone at this point. Securing those dollars is always tricky. Some of the least constrained money right now seems to be funding through the education platform to connect students at home. But there are also programs with USDA and the FCC. And so we're trying to keep on top of those as much as we can. Even more important than knowing about the federal grant programs is lobbying our state contacts so that when the state does have funding related to either dealing with the situation or preparing for the future, another outbreak, another similar situation, we can say to them, we have a plan that's ready to go. This will make a huge difference in connecting our students, our businesses, and keeping this economy viable. We really need to be, I think, leaning on those state resources because we don't need a lot. And it could make a big difference.
Thank you. And I would love to have that discussion, whenever we're ready soon.
Sven Riesem?
Amy, I like your two options. Number one is basically continue as we go. What I don't like about that is that I think there are some major initiatives that we've been discussing. Andre just talked about one of them that everybody, well, at least I want to see move forward and really push on that. So I think option two for me far outweighs number one, understanding that one is sort of that safe ground. The one area of the alternatives that I think may be worth exploring, given our high-speed spots, between the medical center, school, library, BIPCO, a number of spots throughout. If we couldn't break people out into those spots in groups of 10s and be able to have, in essence, high-speed Zoom meeting and with people to take votes, if we have 10 places of 10 people or 11 places of 10 people, I would think that's viable and doable. And we could set up those centers by alphabet or however you do it. I just think that may be a third or one of those alternatives that actually could happen. And I think may be a very good blending for Block Island, where people do like to sit in a chair that's uncomfortable and, sort of have a hand up in the air and, participate. And if there's a way to do that with, 2 groups in medical center, 2 groups in the library, 2 groups in town hall, et cetera, school, I think that would be a very participatory process, plus also leveraging technology, and will get everybody to realize how important broadband is. So 2 is better than 1, 1's a safeguard. I would see if we can't pursue that alternative idea too. But nice job, thank you.
Thank you, Sven. Chris Willie?
Okay, Ken?
Martha, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was only going to say that I don't think we're anywhere near ready for a virtual meeting, especially one that's broken up. That's going to, I can't see people wanting to do that. I wouldn't want to do that. I can see the drive-in style working. I know it's been done for something much small. Well, I don't really know how much smaller because is Molly on the line? Does anybody remember how many people we had at Financial Town Meeting? We'd probably get more, honestly, if we did something different, just out of the novelty of it. But rather than if you're trying to structure meetings in different places, that's going to be a nightmare for the canvassers on top of everything else. I think there are a lot of logistics there that you're kind of missing. And, Amy mentioned one of the things is somebody's always going to call for a paper ballot, whether we end up doing it or not, and just the voting on the call for the paper ballot is going to be very, very difficult virtually, especially the first time we try to do it. I don't think we want to go there. We have a couple of big things we're looking at, but I don't think we want to. This is not the year to be looking for other initiatives and ways to spend lots more money. We had a capital budget that was going to kill us if we went ahead with it. I mean, that's just a fact. And that's going to take some serious review.
Thank you, Martha. Chris Willie?
Thank you. I'm going to agree with Amy with 1 and 2 concurrently. There's a lot of people that are working on this. We don't need to try to, well, I think we could think outside the box for our situation, but this entire pandemic, or the reality of it is, it's just a moving target. We don't know where we're going to be in a month. And I'm looking at the timeline, and Amy, maybe you could expound on it a little bit more. We're obviously not going to have a mechanism in place by June 30th. How far out, how much time does this, or could this buy us if we wanted to include the public, which I think is important, instead of that option of basically the town council, just the town council approving a budget? I'm not really in favor of that. What timeline are we looking at? Hypothetically, I know it's hard, but I mean, if we wanted to include the public at some point, where are we looking at? September, October, or is it just my best guess?
I think it's everybody's best guess at this point as to when you could include the public in the way that we're used to. And I would say if we needed to implement a new approach to engaging the public, which is going to have some basis in technology if we can't meet, then I think it's going to take that long at least to get us functioning on that platform in a way that is meaningful and works for people and demonstrates real public engagement, because it takes time for the users to learn just as much as it takes time for the administration to figure out how to deliver. So that's where even if you could convene a new creative solution, most of them are not going to be ready before fall, I would say. Just in the time it takes to test and deploy and make sure that people have a real voice instead of just a pretend one. And so that's why I say for an initial getting us from June 30th to July 1, I do think there has to be either some continuity until fall, or as soon as we can deploy that, because again, we don't know where we'll be in the fall. Yeah, I don't know if I answered that well, sorry.
Oh, you did. And I guess as far as a finance director's position on this, are you more comfortable with us with the status quo as far as our existing budget, moving that forward through the end of the summer, let's say, while all the while we are exploring other viable options to include the public? And with number 2 in your recommendations happening as well, I mean, I want to know, are we going to extend, or should we be extending this budget realistically through the end of the summer? And my gut tells me, because a good portion of our budget is revenue based on a seasonal nature, would it put us in a better position to know how we should be budgeting for the next year, if we wait till September 1, for instance. Because we're not going to be able to have, as far as groups more than 50, it doesn't look like, there's an outside chance that might happen at the end of the summer. I don't know, but I'm looking at it as like, what kind of time do we need to make these decisions, and what's the drop dead date for actually voting on a fiscal budget?
And I think those are unknowns. I don't think anyone can tell you what the answer is. But you do raise a point I want to expand on a little, which is if you carried forward the 2020 budget, it will be the legal budget that governs our operations. However, we already know today that we're going to have revenue shortfalls if we use that budget. And so while you may legally be able to expend a certain amount through administrative channels, it would be responsible of us to make adjustments to fit our revenue expectations. Just because you can spend all that money doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. So even if we carried forward fiscal year 20 into 21 for either a portion of the year or the entire year, you have to ratchet it down because we just know we're not going to have that revenue there to offset the expense. So it will take adjustment on the administrative level.
Do you have a recommendation? I mean, we're talking about the financial town meeting. How about the meetings leading up to that? Are we, the mechanism to have those, half dozen meetings where we target each segment of the budget and, boards and committees and public support? How about those meetings? Are we able to have those in basically virtually or with this platform? In your opinion, are you comfortable with that?
Communities they've started to, particularly on the discussion side. Are they perfect? No. Are they clunky? Yes. Does everyone have to be patient? Absolutely. But it's still important to have that public process. And so it probably does mirror some of the things you're already doing with questions being submitted by email and a chance for those to be addressed and heard and responded to. You could, again, some communities are layering in public questions through Zoom or through telephone participation. Again, that takes a little time to set up the administration of, and I'm going to let somebody else decide whether that's appropriate or not. But I think it's possible, and I think it's important, and it also gives an opportunity for the public and the department heads to engage in that discussion about what the town's priorities were, because we really didn't have that discussion. You got paper without hearing really the stories behind it. And even to know that those priorities need to be put on the shelf for a while, I think is an important exercise because it indicates where the town was headed and where we have to revise.
Jim Kerr.
Okay.
Couple of things about what Amy said. As she said, having the authority to in essence, extend the budget under an emergency circumstance, that would be option one. That really should be done, in my view, and I've done it a couple times, only in circumstances where you can see an end to it. And you have a mechanism. It happens, for example, sometimes when the city council can't come to agreement, so it automatically extends for a month, but there's a mechanism where it's going to be fixed. City council meets and they fix it. And as she discussed, just because you have an appropriation that you can spend, clearly we're not going to spend to that plan. That's end of sentence. The whole purpose of that budget, well, there's two purposes. One, which she got into right after that, the process through which the town and its leadership identify what priorities are. We really haven't had an opportunity to discuss those priorities. But then secondly, once that budget is put together, you want that to be budgets are also used to manage expenditures. And if we are pretending, we're using a pretend budget, an appropriation that we're constantly, particularly Amy, is constantly identifying, well, you really can't spend to that level. We need to adjust it as follows. That makes it more difficult to manage. So two reasons to at least go to two, which allows the town council to take into account the priorities and the adjustments to those priorities based on what's transpired in the last 4 months or 3 months. It seems to me a far better option, and option one is there as a backstop. The other thing I would say is, on the last question that Chris asked, those kinds of meetings where people can respond have varying levels of success. There is, I think, as everybody here recognizes, but anybody who's operated a town meeting, there's a whole additional level to canvass and make sure that people are actually registered. The person who's registered is actually voting. There's not two people in the house that are voting or whatever it is, or the car. And then also to make sure that somebody who wanted to vote wasn't shut out from voting or wasn't shut out from speaking because their technology didn't work, they didn't know how to work it, whatever it is. That's where it really gets to be difficult, because if you get halfway through that meeting and that's not working, it in a large part invalidates the entire process. And that's a consideration for what we are referring to as alternative or creative financial town meeting approaches. I've been in some electronic town meetings where people are actually voting with fobs, and they're great in a way, but they take some practice, and that's a good deal simpler than this. I've also been in meetings where there were 2 or 3 rooms, gym, auditorium, moderator, televisions, and it gets crazy in a hurry. So we need to be careful with the alternative approaches, but alternative 2 much preferred over alternative 1 for reasons people have already spoken about.
Chris, I think your point was well taken about getting to the end of the summer to see what the revenues actually are, so we have a better idea of what to expect and a better idea to move forward. The other thing we have to remember too is that it's not just the financial world we're dealing with here, it's the real world, and things are changing, as we said, on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. And I think once we get through the end of the summer, hopefully by September, we'll have a better idea what the new reality is going to be, perhaps, in terms of space, in terms of social distancing and that sort of thing. Maybe we'll come to a new plateau or a new norm, and we'll have a better idea of what is more feasible in terms of having those meetings. We may find that social distancing is expanded a little bit, and we may be able to have that large meeting in the gym with a certain amount of distancing and a certain amount of controls, and have more of a traditional financial town meeting in the new world. So, like I said, buying us some time along those lines may help us on a number of different levels.
Yeah, and
Ken?
I wanted to basically know what Amy's comfort factor is, though, with obviously not having a new budget on July 1st to work with.
Right.
Are you we obviously want to get this done as soon as we can, in the best way possible. I just don't know what Amy's comfort level was with, possibly waiting till September 1, for instance. So thank you.
Martha, hold on a second. Go ahead, Amy.
Sure. I just want to be clear because maybe I wasn't. We cannot go into July 1 without a budget.
Right.
So
Right.
there may be a stopgap that gets you to a date certain, but we will need to do something to get us from June 30th to July 1.
So and that stopgap, as I understand it, is option 1.
Yeah.
And
Well, it could be option 2.
Or 2.
It could be option 2, where the council adopts a provisional budget that is then either ratified or amended by a financial town meeting
Okay.
later in the year.
Okay.
Some of those things get a little tricky. I'm going to be honest with bond counsel and financing, and so there's some nuance there that we're still working to understand. But that would be an option in how you executed number 2.
Okay. Thank you.
Sven, hold on a minute. Go ahead, Martha.
Yeah, I think Amy's kind of touched on what I was going to ask about, that we have to have some kind of budget in order to have some kind of levy, because we don't have a levy. I'm not sure we have anything to borrow against for taxes. I used to defer to Amy on that, because it's been a very long time since I've been remotely involved in any of that. But we have to have something in place. I don't think waiting until the fall. Can we even borrow against taxes if we don't have a levy, Amy? Or do we just go on?
No, we cannot.
Okay, that's the short answer. Thanks.
Right.
So we
Sven,
can't really wait. We can't wait till the fall.
Sven, go ahead.
What I like about 2, and Amy, you laid them out so well. 1 is the stopgap, but 2, sets us at a new level and ratchets us down, to your word before. And two, really helps us focus on those priorities. And if we can get there, that's great. And if we can then vote on it in September, October, to Chris's point, we will and have the FTM. And I hope that we're able to pull all that together and the legislature helps us be able to do it. So thanks for all the work to get us there. But there's so many big initiatives. We've all talked about broadband so far, but there are others that we just don't want to slip for another year. And thank you for all the work.
Amy, next steps, do you want to move on to that or what?
Sure. So as we've talked about some of these needing support from the legislature in order to actually be viable solutions. And at some point, some of you are already clued into these conversations, but will need to be a little more vocal in lobbying. And so I'll sort of communicate with each of you, but some of that legislation is being drafted. I saw around today, I think it will be amended, but as it moves forward through the process, it will need the council's support. And we'll do our best to make sure it represents New Shoreham's interests in how it's presented. The next thing I would recommend would be to proceed with scheduling of some of those budget work sessions. You know, proceed gently, but let's get started and talk about what some of those priorities are or were and how they may need to change. But it's time to move forward. And so laying out a schedule for that process, I think would be helpful. And then this is a little bit more my work, but with the idea that we made face carrying forward the 20 budget into 21, understanding what things do need to be adjusted so that is not just legal, but also responsible and keeps the town on sound financial footing. And so again, we'll probably dialogue those a little bit later in the process as we get closer to June 30th, if it seems like that's going to be the approach that ultimately is executed, we can talk more about.
You mean adjustment to expenditures?
Adjustment to expenditures, because we'll approve at this level, but we'll have to spend at this level.
Right.
And that, you know, that'll be priorities and discussion and administrative enforcement.
Okay, so your recommendation until we basically, we're not, this is not an action item tonight, but your recommendation is to start scheduling the work sessions in some form or another. Right.
Yes. You know, this is a lot to digest. So if the council wants to sleep on it and talk about it again, I'm happy to do that. But otherwise, yes, I would try to carve out some time in your calendars to start to have those budget discussions as well.
Okay. Sven Riesem?
Yeah, I know it's not an action item, but it would be great if the town manager, because we have about 6 weeks, right, Amy? And so if the town manager could put together recommendations over the next 4.5 weeks to be able to fit a lot of those budget discussions in and let's start them up next week, that would seem like a very helpful scheduling. I mean, we don't have to take action on it, assuming the town manager's aligned, but I think if the town manager can do that, all his reports, figure out the budget, Chris mentioned half the pieces, and I think we all know them. We can hopefully start to have those dialogues next week.
Right. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Sven, Andre, go ahead.
Yeah, so Amy, just to kind of round up and condense this pill that we've been, swallowing this evening. So basically what I'm going to take away from this meeting with you is that possible pass forward, 1 or 2 in your next steps. And we're going to get going with, some budget work sessions. And that's it, those 3 steps, and focusing on what we want to do with possible pass 1 and 2. Would you agree? Would you agree?
I would.
Okay, perfect. And keep in touch with us. You have been through, I don't know how many town councils, town managers, solicitors, maybe even. And I think what you're telling me well, yeah, I don't think, I know what you're telling me is we're, a little over $800,000 in the hole on a projection. I know that you are very conservative. I think anyway, from gauging you over the past few years I've been here, you're very conservative and you really hate touching those reserves. For you to suggest that, I think that that was a big thing on your part. So I think that I am going to take your advice on this as much as I can. You have put us where we are, which is as Jim said, in an excellent place. So just keep your, what you need us to do coming. And thank you for, your continued hard work.
Thank you, Andre. Any other comments from council at this point? Jim, do you have anything else?
No.
Okay. Thank you, Amy, for your effort and getting the information to us. And we will certainly do our best to live up to our end of the bargain and schedule some meetings so we can work through this and move on to the next step. Hearing nothing further, I make a motion to adjourn. All those in
Second.
favor? Andre?
Second.
Second, Andre, thank you. And all those in favor, Andre?
Does Sven have something to say?
No, just.
Oh, okay.
Just showing you the thumb.
Aye.
Spen,
Aye.
Willie,
He's on mute.
Chris,
His wife's yelling at him. He's on mute.
Aye.
thank you. Martha?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries when we're adjourned.